the annual Skyrim replay. It's getting cold.
Yeah.
What's your build? What's your character? What
My
are we
guy
doing?
is he's a Nord. I only ever play humans in anything. He's like a spindly. So I'm playing with the survival mode on.
Okay, yeah.
You ever
No, I've never
done this? You heard about this?
I'm not that hard, man.
It's sick,
You heard about this survival mode? You heard about
survival
this?
mode? No, it's tight. I've spent so much time I just like fucked off from the main quest. But he's like
Oh yeah, big time.
I'm trying to build, and then so I've just been like living in the woods, hunting elk to survive, and like and selling that for enough gold to stay at the inn, so my guy doesn't get overly exhausted.
Amazing.
And then here and there taking a quest, but you start like it's fucking cool. I'm trying to build him like kind of like a Conan, in the sense, not in the sense of like Arnold Conan, but in like Howard Conan, where he's like he'll sneak when he needs to. He'll use the bow when he needs to, but he can also like don heavy armor and like I want to be able to switch by circumstance, which is why I'm not focusing on one side of the tree. You know what I mean? I'm like diversifying my bonds.
Sick.
Yeah. How about you?
I'm playing a dark elf named Magar the Magnificent.
Oh, you took the name?
I did take the name. Yeah. I'm doing like I've never done like a mage playthrough before.
Neither have I.
So I was like, I'll do the college storyline. And like, I'm like, he's like sort of like came like I like the intro to the game is amazing where they're like, got caught crossing the border, right?
Yeah,
like,
so many reasons one could be crossing the border.
So I'm just like, like this dude is out here like just looking to like almost kind of wanting to become like an artificer more than anything. Like
right.
I'm super into like enchanting shit and
baubles and
baubles. And then for the first little bit I was doing like anytime I came across like the Imperials with the prisoner, I would free the dude and fuck up the Imperials because they had imprisoned me.
Yeah.
And then I got to fucking where's the Ulfric's like house, the big city.
It's like in the north, right?
Yeah, and that's like the city where they're like super racist against the dark elves. And now I've just been like, fuck this, I'm going like full mage, and then he's just gonna be like a magic arms dealer to both sides of the war and let them like implode upon themselves.
Have you done any of the main quest?
No.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Yeah, just bailed on main quest.
I don't want any dragon powers.
No shouts.
I've never completed it, but I have no interest in completing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's fun. It's like,
do you need to complete it to get to like the expansions and shit? Because
I don't know. I've never DL'd NEC.
Yeah. yeah. Same. Yeah. It's fun, dude. Like it's like a little vacation,
dude. Totally.
In the depths of winter.
Yeah. Once it starts snowing out, I just like I'm like, take me back to Dawnstar. You know?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. We're talking about. I guess today the reason I bring this up is because today we're talking about like video games and RPGs, and like that's I think sort of the way the thesis.
That's not a thesis, but I know that's the topic. Yeah. The way that people fucking like confuse them.
Totally. Or
you know what I mean?
Or like adding elements from one into the other. Like
they don't belong. Oh, spicy Guinness.
Mm-hmm. So we should also say you're listening to Cocked.
Or something else, but probably Cocked.
Yeah. 3 episodes in, we should have it figured out by now.
We're narrowing it down.
We're
waiting for the market research to come in.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cocked is a sick name, so maybe it's that.
Yeah. The podcast is called Cocked. We talk about tabletop games and,
all kinds of whatever tickles our fancy, man.
Yeah. I'm Campbell.
I'm Connor.
Yeah. So yeah, RPGs versus video games. Does it have to be versus RPGs and video games? RPGs featuring video games?
Featuring video. Maybe that is it, because I think that's like what made us want to talk about this is the fact that people like get their chocolate and the peanut butter. You know what I mean? Like it's not tasty. It's like bad. It's like a opposite anti-Reese's Pieces.
Yeah.
Because like people, well, like I've found sometimes playing tabletop as a player, playing RPGs that I'm playing what the DM is like putting out, and it's like, oh, this was designed like a video game level or like a video game encounter.
Oh, okay. So you're thinking more along the lines of like DMing don'ts is like when they incorporate a little bit too much like rigid video game mechanics.
Yeah, but also
into...
like the logic of it only works like as if it was a map editor in a game.
Right, yeah.
Like, you the NPCs are like standing around waiting, like they've always been there and always will be there, like
Yeah.
coded in.
Yeah.
And then players do it too, though. Like players, like,
totally.
you know, think of their character as a set of like digital outputs.
So that, like, I think like kind of like from the player side is where I find this most interesting, and that like I do think that like I think that a lot of the like current D&D boom that we're seeing right now is like maybe somewhat in part of like TV shows like Community that doing like the D&D episodes and stuff.
Right.
But I think like Skyrim specifically in like my social circle had like a really big, like when people would be like, "Oh, you play D&D? What's that like?" I'm like, "Oh, you playing Skyrim?" It's like it's that
analog version, yeah.
And
Skyrim was like wildly popular. I think it was the first time I saw RPGs. Well, maybe this is not the case, but being played by both men and women. You know what I mean? Like it's very engrossing for all sorts of people. And then before that, like, I'm not saying it's like a 1-to-1 causation, but like it was mostly dudes that I played D&D with, and like that's changed for a number of different reasons, obviously. But like I definitely think Skyrim has like a place in that.
But there's definitely an element of like I can kind of think back to, you know, early instances of getting like my fiance playing D&D, or like other friends of ours like playing D&D who had never really played it before. And it's
like a frame of reference.
Reference where they're like, okay, cool, like, yeah, Skyrim, video games. I can play this like a video game. And then that sort of like really cool moment where they realize that there's like, oh, I can do, you know,
it's more than that. It's
if you're in an encounter in a video game or in a combat in a video game, you can fucking hit the guy with a sword, you can shoot magic at him, and those are really your options. And then like the first time that like we were playing, I think we were playing D&D, and it was like a ship-to-ship combat, and someone was like, "Oh, cool! Can I try and like use a grappling hook that I have in my inventory to like swing across and kick someone into the water?"
Yeah.
Which is a thing that is like you don't have like they didn't.
That has to be built into the mechanics.
Exactly.
Of the video game
that's not in. Nobody coded that into
Yeah.
the game, so it's not part of it. And then seeing other people around the table just be like, "Oh shit! Okay, like the chains are off." Like. And
that's the thing too, though, is that like some people don't make that connection because they're like, well, I'm looking for the actual code of the game, as in the rule book. Like, where are the rules for fucking swinging on a grappling hook? Because I'm sure there's some way to like do it. Instead of just using common sense to like
streamlining it, right?
To have it down to a quick die roll. I think a lot of people get like hung up on that shit. Like, you know, I jump on the table and I hit him with the pan, and it's like, well, you're not proficient in pans, so you can't.
You take a -5 to that. Yeah. But that's like, I don't like, that's definitely a thing that I think is in terms of like, if we were to say RPGs versus video games and like talking about this, is like there is, I think that element of like why I've never been as much of a video gamer as I have been a tabletop gamer is that like when I do go back to playing Skyrim after playing D&D for a long ass time, there is a little bit where I'm like, I feel so constrained in this. I feel like there are things that I want my character to do in this game that like I'm just, again, it's not in the code, and like there's something super like liberating and like the sort of collaborative creativity of a in-person tabletop game.
Yeah, because some people, like a lot of people, like sometimes use the offhand of like the game's engine when talking about a tabletop RPG of like the books, like the core mechanics. But like that's not really a good comparison. Like the actual engine is like the collective brains of you and your buddies.
Totally.
That like the game will only ever be as good as like that gestalt will to have fun and be creative about how to play. Whereas like a video game is something that's been crafted for you to consume.
Right.
And it's not a bad thing. Like we love video games, but they, like it's only as good as like the painting that has been presented, like the artists, the team of artists, like ability to deliver something novel.
Yeah. Or like even that idea of like this has been created for you to consume as opposed to something for you to like more actively like take part in, and where it's like any video game has a very like specific, there is like a goal to the video game, which is to like beat the game, to you know, take and side quests, like this, that, the other, whatever, there is always like a challenge to beat. And there is something that is like inherently, even in a single player game, there's something that's inherently like sort of like competitively driven. Like you're playing against the game. Whereas like an RPG, like you get a group of 5 people together, and it's like the goal of that is whatever those 5 people can agree on the goal being.
Yeah, totally.
Which is, again, like it's a very like liberating and like more stimulating, I think, creatively, because there is like a constant input in that like way that you don't get in video games, where you're like, I'm not deciding the narrative is decided for me. I'm deciding like maybe certain parts of the narrative that I want.
Yeah, which is like goes into like the fucking do's and don'ts shit, because it's like
totally
people who, like, if you're DMing and you don't realize that, like if you're trying to deliver something to a player or a player group, like the way that a group of developers deliver a product in a video game, like your campaign's gonna be fucking dog shit.
Well, it's like that also just comes down to a thing of like not realizing the medium to its full potential.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Like that it's like you can do anything you want, and you can really do anything you want in a tabletop RPG. And like if you are treating it like, sure, for an introduction to it, getting a group of all new players and treating it just like a video game is kind of fine for new players to understand like the mechanics. But I think once you get past that, if you're still treating everything,
literally, it only works insofar as you're showing how to run combat in like a dungeon crawl.
Yeah,
because like other than that, that's like you designing a level essentially with like a closed environment. That's why like it's a good way to start a campaign that way, because it's like so you can map that onto any, like everyone understands it intuitively. But that's like the least interesting part of playing role-playing games, in my opinion.
Sure,
like,
yeah.
Like the dungeon crawl can be fun, and like I love to do them, but like that's not what the medium is like set up to deliver the most.
Totally, yeah. I do also think that like by that token, like I've played D&D with like, I had a group going for a little while that like all of those guys worked in video game development, and like those are some of the best dungeon crawls I've ever played. I think specifically, again, it's like that communal agreement of like what everybody wants out of this. If you have a group that everybody just wants to do combat and do dungeon crawling and stuff, and like that's what your group has decided is the most fun for those 5 people, and you get somebody who does have a background in video games, and they can like
for sure
build super interesting traps and like really great combat encounters. Like that is, I do look back at like that as one of the best like dungeon crawls I've ever that's like what fucking D&D been a part of.
Also, like the structure of D&D as a game is like set up to do dungeon crawls. It's not set up to do really anything else. Like everything else is just like connecting node to get the party to the next crawl.
Right. Yeah.
There's not a lot of mechanical scaffolding to allow organic things to kind of come out.
Sure.
Because most of the rules around that are there to like give you a framework to do combat.
Okay.
In, like, all 3 books, you know what I mean?
Totally.
Whereas like other games have pages and pages and pages dedicated to here's how to generate seeds to interesting hooks and adventures that will like engage the player to go down those roads.
Sure.
D&D doesn't like have that. You know what I mean? It's like it's more of like comparing like D2, not Mighty Ducks. I know you're gonna make that joke.
Where they fight Iceland. Like their combat encounters against Iceland.
Where, like an action RPG like Diablo versus a Skyrim.
Right. Yeah. I mean? Totally. Yeah. That's a really great analogy. So if D&D 3.5 or D&D 5th edition or like any Dungeons and Dragons is analogous to like a Diablo, what would be something that you feel like is in like is there an RPG that you like that is a little bit more open world? Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption.
Those are good. I think there's like there's like 3 tiers maybe. There's like Diablo type analogy, not 1-to-1 obviously.
Yeah.
Then there's like a Skyrim Red Dead 1-to-1, and then there's like a game like Pillars of Eternity or something, like a really like a role or the really involved like isometric role playing games that are like, I don't know. You know what? Never mind. This analogy's not going anywhere. This is completely wrong. Actually, to answer your question, I actually don't have that exhaustive of a background with different like Worlds Without Number and Stars Without Number are like the only other two games that I've really invested like hours of playtime in.
Sure.
Like I haven't played. There's a game I think it's called like Hill Tribes or something. That's like or Hillmen.
Okay.
It's a system, and the first one was like the setting was like your Bronze Age group of people. But that entire game is facilitated around interpersonal conflict. Like non-combat interpersonal conflict.
Yeah.
Based on your like relations to each other in a closed setting of like a hill tribe or a starship crew or something like.
Cool.
And those mechanics are like the resource management, spending actions, blah blah blah. That's all for like settling scenes with each other.
Right. Yeah.
That's like a far extreme of like the kind of role playing game where it's like how.
I think it was listening to like a live play podcast of like something like that, where it's like you have dice to like settle arguments, like kind of thing, and it's like it is like
and, like,
the idea of like everything is like
yeah.
about a scene as opposed to like a yeah. That's cool.
So there's like things like that where that's just an example of like the way you incentivize different types of play.
Totally.
And like D&D's rules are set up to incentivize aggression and combat, and even like I think something like Stars Without Number and stuff I think is like kind of in the middle of that.
Well, Stars Without Number I think is a thing where like having played that with you for a while now, like they do a really good job of understanding that like a lot of people get into RPGs for combat encounters, and that is like a big part of the game, but they do a really good job of like sort of incentivizing other mechanics in the game simply by making combat incredibly lethal.
Yeah, and you want to find other avenues of settling shit.
Once you hit that first combat and you like somebody like one shots you with a pipe, yeah, and you're just like, oh, okay, cool. This is not D&D. We have to like
think shit through and like try to find other ways to like overcome challenges.
Well, yeah, and it's a thing where it's like in something like D&D where like maybe it's like, oh, I'm gonna play a monk because that's like a skill based class. You know, I'm gonna build up all my skill trees. It's still like the majority of the time you would be better to just put all of those points into combat, even if you're not like an optimized combat class.
Yeah.
Having played like a monk in Pathfinder and been like, ooh, I want to fill out my skill tree. I want to get good at this. I want to get good at this. And like, I rolled that like once every 3 sessions, whereas I was punching shit all the fucking time.
Yeah.
Versus in like a Stargrave situation where like I'm playing a mechanic and like a hacker, and like I 9 times out of 10, even in combat encounters, will be able to find something to do with those skills, and like it is more useful to like the overall party and more useful to like the game, and that's a very rewarding thing of like finding sort of like fun, interesting things to do other than shooting a guy. Yeah,
totally. And it's like, do you find when we're playing that game, like there's a lot more onus on you, I think, as a player to like come up with solutions that would use those skills of like, oh, is there anything like this in the room? Is there like, can I do this? How does this work so that I can like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Can we do it?
Totally.
And then the DM has to be like, oh yeah, like that's a cool idea. Or like, yes, but you know, we talked about like, yes, but yes. And in our first episode, but like, yeah, but like here's the risk of it, just so it's not like an auto win, like, oh, I've just come up with a Deus Ex Machina or whatever.
Yeah.
And that you lose that no matter what game you're playing if you're, as a DM, designing every encounter is this is the puzzle that they have to solve, and they can only use these pieces.
Yeah.
Which is like a video game mindset to come in. And then and if you're saying like, no, that's not in the room. But you can also say like, no, that's not in the room, but there's this that you could do.
Yeah.
That's kind of similar to what you were thinking that I didn't, pre-write into the fucking encounter.
That's like totally. I agree with all that. And like, yeah, I do think that like Stargrave has been really good for that. But I also think that that's something that again isn't like really super. Like you can do that in D&D. You can have that sort of like when I started running like Edge of the Empire. Doing like the Fantasy Flight like Star Wars games, because they operate. It's not like a grid system. It's like they do like ranges,
which I fucking love, man. I'm actually kind of over like tactical RPG combat.
And so when I started running those, and it was the idea was like your close range, medium range, long range, and that was sort of like how you determined movement. Like you can move from one range to another range. You can do certain things within certain ranges, as opposed to you have this number of squares and threatened spaces and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I stopped doing grids. I stopped doing maps. Like we did every game of Edge of the Empire that I've ever run has been completely theater of the mind.
Yeah.
And that was a thing where it was like someone was like, even just like in an encounter that is a combat encounter. So I was like, oh, can I, are there like, we're in a hangar for a bunch of spaceships. Are there some crates that I could like hide behind? And it's, if I had drawn out a map, it would be like, well, I didn't draw crates on the map, so there aren't, versus...
Yeah. And if you say yes, and you do draw crates on the map, you've now changed the tactical situation in such a way that, like, someone else will be like, well, if I know those fucking crates were there, I would have, like, done my 3 fucking squares moves to get in there.
So, and then you can also add in a thing where it's like, yeah, you can, but they're full of fuel. So, like, you can hide behind it, but your ass might get blown up.
Also, it lets people off the hook for stuff like it keeps you in the thing, because it's like, you know, if you had the crates, you know, say I'm going first and I don't ask about crates, and I run out and shoot, and you know, then it's the enemy's turn, they shoot me and I'm down. Yeah. And then this next guy's like, is there crates? And you're like, oh, I didn't draw any, but like, here are some crates. Yeah. And then it makes me feel bad, because it's like, well, I was playing like what you see is what you get with the thing. But if you're doing theater of the mind, it takes the onus off the DM and puts it on the player, because they're like, shit, I should have thought to go into cover. Yeah. But it's like my character might have not thought of that as well, so it kind of like fits. Yeah, and it removes the like that sort of like tactical element being less so about like exploiting tactics that are specifically written into the game. Yeah. And makes it way more about like, what can I come up with, and like how like if this was a situation like it influences like the RP of combat, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, because I think that's a thing where a lot of the time when you get to combat, that is, even people who are like really good at playing RPGs, not like a video game, once you get to combat, they switch into video game mode. Totally. And it's like, oh, well, like I'm gonna like, you have to think in like 3 inches and fucking action points and like all that shit. Whereas this is way more about like, oh, okay, like maybe my character wouldn't take a 5-foot step to avoid an attack of opportunity. Like, yeah, exactly. You're thinking way more about like, oh, my character's like a skulky piece of shit that would not get involved in the combat, so I'm gonna look for somewhere to hide, or like, totally. Which is a thing that like when you have a grid and you have minis, people just turn it into Warhammer, or they turn it into like, you know. Yeah, and you can think about stuff like, because a lot of people are like, I want my game to feel like a movie or a book, like these like finely crafted stories, and the truth is like you can't, and I think we'll get into this in a bit, but like you can't do that. It just doesn't work. Like, it's not how the game functions. So like, you know, in Saving Private Ryan, you seen that movie? No, I actually like, it's one of those things where it's like, I've seen the D-Day scene like a bunch of times. Yeah. I know, so my boy Dominic Toretto is in it. But I've never watched the whole thing. No. Who's your man Vin Diesel's in it? Yeah, Dominic Toretto. Oh, I didn't know that's his name. That's his name in Fast and Furious. Oh, I see. Okay. So it's not Vincent. Wait, his name's not actually Vincent Diesel, is it? He changed his name from like I think his real name is Lucarelli, like, or some Italian shit. Is like Paul Vincent. Like I think Vincent is his last name. Okay. And then he was like Vin Diesel. Like, all right, well played, Vin. Yeah. Vehicle identification number diesel fuel. Anyway, there's a scene in that movie where there's like a kind of like a bitch made guy, and he's like scared. And then there's so at the end, one American and one German are like wrestling on the top story of this house, and you know, trying to get the knife to like kill each other, and like the scared character is walking up the stairs like listening to the shouting, and is like afraid of like getting involved, and he's hearing his friend like slowly, like, you know, the German gets on top of him and he's like putting the knife in him, and it's like he's like pleading like, no, come on, we can like talk about this, and then he screams. And like, that would be very difficult to replicate from an RP perspective if the character who's playing Scaredy Cat is like, oh, I know it's 3 squares from the stairs to get into, and I can probably get the drop on him because he's prone, and I know how far away it is, so I can like, yeah. But if it's like, you know, you're having this combat over here, and I'm like to you, yeah, you're walking up the stairs, and you know, you might, you know, you see the other player's turn, you know what's going on, but I'm telling you, like, you don't know if you can get to him fast enough. You
Totally.
don't know where they are in the next room. So I might put a penalty on you for, like, surprise, he's actually very far away from the door and he's able to pull out his gun and shoot you as you walk through the door.
Yeah.
Because you didn't like that possibility is in your mind as the player who's like skulking up the stairway. So you might let your partner die because you don't want to get shot in the face.
Yeah.
And you need a couple things for that. You need to not know. You need some kind of mystery as to what you're encountering. Some kind of like fog of war kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you also need lethal combat. You need
Totally.
like there to be actual, like if they get a shot on you, you need to be like, you might die in one hit.
Yeah. Which is like, again, like doing theater of the mind combat, using a system like Stargrave that does have like more lethal combat is like there's kind of an element of like, with D&D, like, and how much like magic, and like by the time you're like third level you're basically superheroes.
Yeah.
And like there's kind of an element of that also like ties back to video games, where like I could be getting my ass fucking handed to me in Skyrim, and it's like, oh, I'm just gonna pause the game, I'm gonna go to my inventory, I'm gonna drink a bunch of potions. Sergio gonna be fine. Eat some cheese.
I'm gonna eat like 80 kilograms of cheese real quick.
Like there again, like using, it's the difference of like using the mechanics of the game in a little bit more of a freeform way to like facilitate the style of game that you want to play versus like exploiting the core engine of the game. Is a thing that I think is both like endemic to video games and like,
which some people will let you do too when they're playing, because they're like, again, to circle back to this fucking bleed over from video game mentality into tabletop, some people will let you do that because it's like, well, you're taking an action to use an item or some shit, and not like, because it's like you can find a rules as written way to do it. They don't have the like conviction to be like, actually no, you can't fucking get that potion off in time, like, you know what I mean, like, because and that's the other thing D&D has like potion overload, like they're so plentiful. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh no, like,
so what do you think that, like, so we talked a bit about tabletop, kind of like what it is, the core like mindset about it. You talked a bit about like the core like competitiveness of video games. So what is your sense of like the big differences, like and those big differences that sometimes get bled over?
Oh man, like, you ever played like D&D with somebody who's like trying to win D&D? Who's trying to do the best at imagination? Like, you know, I used to work with a guy who, like, I made the mistake of like telling him that I was into D&D before I realized that he was totally the kind of guy who like comes from like a hard video game background.
Right.
And like every week, like on Monday, I would be like, hey, how's your week? And he's like, great. Went to the local hobby shop and I just like beat a bunch of people at D&D.
What
like,
the fuck?
Like, it was just like I killed the most stuff. I like, you know, like, and I was just like, oh man, that sounds like fucking nightmare, you know? And like, yeah, even with video games, like if I'm not playing like a solo game, like if I'm playing video games with people, like I was always the guy who was like way more, and I think part of this is because I do have, we talked about this a little bit with Warhammer, I do know that I have a little bit of a tendency to like get a little overly competitive. And especially with video games, is something that I'm like not as good at. Like I was really good at buying Eldar in 6th edition, but like I'm not as good at video games. So like playing like shit like Halo or like any of those kind of things, like if there's a cooperative option, like I'm way more into that, of like playing with somebody to like beat the engine of the game, which is also something that I think is like kind of, you can introduce somebody to D&D by being like, oh yeah, we're all playing Master Chiefs together against like the bad guys, which is like the DM. But even that's a thing where it's like you have to get past the point, because it's like I've also played D&D where like nothing is worse than playing D&D with a DM who thinks it's their job to beat the party as opposed to like facilitate the fun, which is also a very like video gamey mentality where it's like I'm playing all the bad guys, and it's like no, you're playing all the guys that aren't these four guys.
Exactly.
Good guys, bad guys. Like
there's like a corollary to that, which is like not trying to beat the party, but it's intrinsically the same urge, which is my job as the DM is to show the party how clever and how cool of things I can imagine are. That is the worst. Like that is the worst. When it's like someone is like when faced with questions of like, can I do this or can we do this instead, is just like, oh, no, like you have to go in the cave.
You have to solve this the way that I have determined
exactly.
you will solve it, right? Like,
yeah. Or like after an adventure, we'll be like, well, it would have been more fun if you went down hall 4F. Like, there was something really cool in there that I for some reason wouldn't show you unless you did that exact sequence of events.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. Like everyone who has any experience DMing has done the like thing where you've meticulously planned out like a room or an encounter or whatever that the party is just completely circumnavigated, and instead of being like, well, what you should have done is like you just shut the fuck up and use that in the next session.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like that's less planning for future Campbell. I don't have to do that later.
And also they're like we're like just like offended that you didn't want to go to the set piece thing. They're like, the ball is tonight and everyone from the 5 corners of Flandaflia will be there, including these 3 NPCs that are really important to me that you've forgotten about. Everyone's like, that sounds fucking stupid. Yeah. Like it's really funny.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I don't know. Like I think again, it's just like,
but that's like, sorry.
Yeah. Nope.
But that's like an example of video game thinking in D&D, because it's like, well, if I've coded the encounter to be this and it's existing over here, and if the player doesn't enter the right commands to walk to that place, then it's not being used because it's just in stasis over there. Instead of like, you know, you did a crazy you had a socialite ball kind of encounter with mechanics and stuff and a thing to find out, and you're like, fuck, like I have to force them there. Or but the correct way to do it is like, if they don't go to the ball, you take those mechanics and you do it in like the warlord's longhouse.
Yeah.
Like when they arrive in the village, you know what I mean? Like you transport, you reskin it and you tweak things so it makes sense in the context there, and you just use it somewhere else.
Yeah. Or like even just like make whatever thing was like going to happen at the ball that you could have facilitated or stopped.
Happens.
Yeah. Right? Like I definitely remember there was like a first time that I played 5th with you running. Like we were doing some dungeon crawl because it was like first session. And we were like, oh, I think we've earned a short rest. Like we're gonna take a short. We had to go into a dungeon to like rescue a guy. And we were like, oh, we're gonna take a short rest, and we took an hour rest. And then when we got to the end of the dungeon, you were like, yeah, he's dead. They killed him. they did the sacrifice because you fucking took a rest.
You chilled for an hour. Yeah,
like, yeah. And then it's that thing where you're just like, oh, cool. This isn't the video game thing where like, you know,
like people do use short rests like identical to how they exist in Skyrim.
Yeah,
when you're like rest for 3 hours and you're in a dungeon.
Yeah,
you're standing over the bodies of your slain enemies that were on watch. There's like braziers going up his ears, whatever the fuck, and you're like, I will sleep in his cot for 6 hours, and then everyone's in the same exact position and like restarts their pathway instead of the real cool thing, which is like, even if you do a short rest, like shit has to happen during the rest. Like someone has to be. Like something I like to do is like, okay, give me the order of your watch. And then roll I roll like a D4 or whatever to figure out when the thing happens, who's on watch. Yeah. And like their particulars of those characters, like what their skills, like how good they are at listening, what their fear levels are, will like influence the way they react to maybe like not necessarily encounter, but like the sound of something large moving beyond the door. Yeah. And they have to figure it out. Like, do they sound the alarm? Do they wait? And like sounding the alarm might facilitate a dangerous combat. Waiting, maybe they'll allow the enemy to get a jump on them, or maybe nothing will happen. Yeah. And that allows a little like role-playing moment for a player to have, maybe even just by himself. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like him, the DM. And that can be the result of actually like a failed roll on a chart to see what happens during a short rest thing. Totally. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's like, if that's like a nothing happens, you can say like, well, you hear something. It's not going to attack you potentially. Yeah. But that's like there. Yeah. And you can do that with like everything. Like you can turn any kind of like non-event in a role-playing game into a potentially like session turning point.
Totally.
Where
Yeah.
like things all fall apart or some crazy character moment happens that like changes the dynamic between two players.
And that's like, I think that's a thing where like you were talking earlier about trying to like having that video game or like sort of like director author mentality of DMing, and like trying to make your narrative compelling in the way that like a movie is compelling or a video game is compelling.
Yeah.
And that you're right in that never works. And like like D&D is a game of like smaller moments, and like, or like role-playing games in general are like way more about like the smaller moments that build up to be more than the sum of their parts. And so like having the mentality of like trying to make something cinematic on a grand scheme is bad, whereas like having the mentality of trying to make small moments cinematic is like really great. And I think that is, again, like a thing that like the medium of D&D is really, really good at being able to like create these like microcosms of like really fun small. You always remember the roll that you failed way more than like the crit that you killed the thing.
Yeah, you don't know the story of your role-playing game session until it's done.
Yeah.
Like that's where everyone is like, the human brain will put a series of events into a narrative
You like
chain.
the debrief afterwards is
yeah.
like you like mythologize like the botched roll or whatever that happened like half an hour ago. Yeah.
Like it's very, very difficult to deliver a narrative actually like in the moment, because like you can kind of nudge things in a direction.
Yeah.
But if you're expecting things to happen in a certain order in order to deliver a narrative arc, like you're fucked. It's gonna suck. Like, and you can't. That's another like example of like video game thinking where you're like, this is the storyline. I know how it's gonna end, and I'm gonna put people through this like it's a fucking ride at Disney World. You know what I mean? Like the Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's like you see all of these things, but you can't really like engage with them. Like it's going to end this way.
Yeah.
Whereas like you just want to put challenges in people's way, and the fun of the game is seeing how people overcome those challenges. Like that's the key to role-playing games, is like I'm going to set a bunch of obstacles in the way of what the characters want.
Yeah.
And I can't tell them what they want actually. Like you have to have that conversation before of like, what does your character, which is why I like the mechanics of stuff that gamifies character creation, not in the sense of like stats, but in the sense of like background, wants, needs, things that the character cares about.
The like Edge of the Empire obligation system is like really good for that.
And making those things have consequences for characters. Like if you don't move towards them, you can't level up, or there'll be repercussions or blah 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 blah. Yeah. Like that's super key, and I'm super stoked about that kind of shit right now. Yeah. Because that's something that video games cannot do.
No.
Like, they really cannot. Unless you're playing like a Halo where it's like you're just going from level to level towards a goal.
Yeah. So something that because we were talking earlier about like when you were talking about your Skyrim playthrough right now, you were saying you're doing like survival mode and you're turning sort of like optional rules on or like not using certain things. You know, like in no session of D&D that I have ever played has someone brought up like rations or like that kind of shit. And so there is a little bit of like in some video games you do have the option to be like, oh, I want to turn this mode on, or I want to play with this, or I want to and like I think that's another really interesting thing in RPGs, again, about like the general consensus and like agreement of all of the parties involved. And like you're working on like you're sort of like scratch building sort of a modified version of Worlds Without Number right now, and you're pulling in a lot of like things from different RPGs, and like how like tell me a little bit about that.
It's the kind of thing where I have a very specific vision with this game that I want to deliver, which is like highly dangerous, very spooky, kind of like unsettling fantasy. Medieval fantasy,
right?
And so I wanted to find rules that would help deliver that tone, kind of like out of the box, just by like the way that you create your characters. I took the funnel concept from one game, the character funnel concept, where you actually don't know who your end character is going to be until after session 0.
Yeah, so your first session, you're basically playing like 3 really shitty characters.
Yeah, randomized backgrounds. You don't have to give them names. They have like shitty stats. I think it's from Dungeon Crawl Classics. I'm fucking forgetting the name of the. I think it's Dungeon Crawl Classics is the game that it's from.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you start as like 3 essentially like NPC level peasants, or any other kind of background. You could be like ex nobles, but the point is that they're all lower, out of their luck kind of people.
Yeah,
and you have to go through like a blender, and see who survives.
Yeah,
and from there, and it kind of forces a certain type of first session that's going to be violent.
Sure.
But that's also okay.
Yeah.
And then when you hit whoever survives, you can select one of them, or maybe you only have one guy left, and you then level up to level 1.
Yeah.
And then you roll, or you come up with, based on the way that the first session 0 kind of went and the role playing that happened there, what you think this person might be motivated by, afraid of, blah blah blah, and then you start from there.
Which is exactly what we were talking about like 10 minutes ago, of the idea of like you can't create the narrative of your game while it's happening. You have to like sort of retroactively decide. Yeah. And that like that.
What I found from sorry, go ahead.
Well, that does away with the like, again, like kind of like more solo video game RPG thinking of like, this, my character is a knight with this backstory whose morals are this, and it's like, cool, so that doesn't really align with like anybody else in the party.
That's exactly what
and
I was
then you have
say,
to like go back around to fix that.
From the few times we've play tested it, and we've play tested, that's an established mechanic from another game, but we've play testing as in that mechanic with all the other mechanics we've either invented or ported over from other games.
Yeah.
What I found from the couple times that we've done the character funnel is that all of the backgrounds, excuse me, or like most of the backgrounds begin to have, and the characters begin to have relations with each other right out the jump. Yeah. And that's what creates conflict within a party, which makes things interesting. And also like shared goals that you can kind of like get behind. Cause like if everyone comes to a D&D session 1 and it's like, this is, like you were just saying, this is my knight who is from this faraway land and wants to rescue the golden cup of whatever the fuck. Yeah. And you're the other guy's I'm the crazy
this is my thief. Druid who hates everybody from that city.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, cool.
And it's just like, wow, these people, and it's like the thing of like, these people would never know each other. Yeah. Never, they have no reason to like or trust
they
each
meet
other.
In a tavern.
Exactly.
So.
It's just like the tavern shit. And it's like, but the character funnel is great because it's like, it starts you, you put a little restriction on the players, which is you're all from the same place. You've got your backgrounds for your guys. Figure out how, or start to think about how they might know each other. Yeah. And how their lives might be entwined. They might not all be born there, but like they're all starting from the same spot. And you put that restriction on people, and it actually allows for way more creativity if you're just like, you can be whatever you want. Like,
it's also work. Doing that kind of thing where it's like you randomize your background, you randomize the items that they start with, and even like when we rolled stats for that, we did random stats.
Yep.
It takes away the like sort of like wargamey nature of like min-maxing your imagination character.
Exactly.
Like it's a thing where you're just like, oh, like, like usually when I play any kind of like RPG, I usually tend to go for like party tank, like something that can like fucking swing a sword, maybe a little bit of magic. I like throwing a little bit of that shit in there. And like when I rolled up my shit, I think I was like a homeless shaman who had like a fucking like an 8 in strength and like just like all of the like all
the
of this.
Only item you started with was like a bag full of sheep knuckle bones or something.
Yeah, and like, but that was a thing where it was like I had a lot of fun playing that because it was like it actually forced me to get out of my comfort zone and play a type of character that I wouldn't normally play.
Yeah.
Which is like same with like this Skyrim run through that I'm doing right now, where it's just like, oh, let's try and do something that I normally wouldn't do.
That's the kind of thing you can put. Even when I played D&D 5th edition game with the boys, like when 5th edition came out, so I was like 6 years ago, some shit, maybe even longer. It went for like 2 years or something, and I played. And one thing I do think in games like that, if you're gonna play a game like that, is to give your guy or girl or whatever like a personality flaw that will debilitate the party. So like
Right.
I played like a noble, like an exiled hedge knight who's like trying to get his shit back.
Right.
His family's all like wiped out or whatever, disgraced, and he was just like voraciously hated peasants. And so like that would cause like crazy problems like all the time because he like wouldn't shake people's hands and like just like a piece of shit. And it's really fun to role play that because it breeds interpersonal conflict within the party, and it's not easy to fix. Like it,
No.
and you know what I mean. Like, and even if you kind of aren't great at role playing, and you kind of like after like 3 sessions, like, well, I've learned to like peasants or some shit. Then you got a little arc. You know what I mean? You got a little like fucking thing that happened, and you're not just the same guy.
Yeah. Do you think like I'm trying to think of like where because we've talked a lot about like video game mentality in RPGs and like have you like taken like an RPG mentality to your video game playing at all? Does that go both ways?
Yeah, but the weird thing is like not in role playing games because they're too limited. I think like I can only play like I think this guy would be like kind of an asshole.
Right.
Like, that's as far as it goes. Like I know you like to think like backstories for Skyrim characters and shit, and I just can't do it.
I'm also playing No Fast Traveling right now.
Which is hard dick
super
savage.
fun.
Yeah.
I fucking love that shit.
Yeah, fuck yeah, it's the way you got to go. Turn on survival mode, dude.
But you know, like, because the other thing that I was thinking of is like realistically, our generation, the first role playing game that any of us were like really introduced to is like the Pokemon Game Boy games.
Yeah,
right.
True, yeah.
And like that is a thing that is like. It doesn't really read as like an RPG, but like
it's totally an RPG. Yeah,
you can do those kind of self-imposed rules. Oh, I'm only going to collect fire Pokemon, or I'm gonna
yes.
Or
and
like
that's the thing. Like it was an RPG. It's a good RPG for kids because it's like what the Pokemon you like. If you go after them, it's like it's your role playing yourself in the Pokemon world.
Yeah,
and then you're not just like this is the best. Well, some kids do that, but like you know what I mean.
Have you ever done the Nuzlocke rules? Do you know about this in Pokemon?
No.
So it's like
what the hell is that?
So it came out of like some webcomic or some shit like that. But it's like I did like a playthrough a while ago. I was doing like an emulator, and so it's like a self-imposed like sort of rule set where it's like resource management and also like so it's basically the idea is like any area that you go into in the game. Every time you go into a new area, you're only allowed to catch the first Pokemon that you come across.
Oh, I see.
And if any of your dudes faint, they have died.
They're dead. That's cool.
And
like
so
mode?
Yeah, it's a little bit of hardcore mode, but it also like again pushes you into like like normally you wouldn't be like fucking like I was running with like a Caterpie that was like just unbelievably good because that was the only fucking thing that I was allowed to catch. It's like I don't know, like taking that sort of like RPG where it's like I'm going to decide how to make this fun for myself in a way that like the developers, the programmers didn't initially envision, and putting that into video games.
It's harder in video games though because you always have the out of like I could just fucking stop doing this. You know, totally. Like, I could just be like I'll turn survival mode off because fuck this mountain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas like when you do that in RPGs, it's so much more fulfilling because someone will hold you accountable and be like, no man, don't be a bitch. Like that's you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you don't get that in video games. I do RP. I play a lot of like grand strategy games, like Paradox games.
Okay.
Stellaris and like stuff like that. And I always role play in them. Like I can't min max them.
Right.
I don't know. Like for like those grand strategy games, I always RP, and I RP in a way more. It's way more fulfilling than. I just like haven't actually found, to be honest, like video game RPGs to really. They're not there yet. They're not there yet. Like
it's the limitations of the medium, right?
Exactly,
like it's just I think we still got a little bit of time. We're gonna agree upon whatever time is best for the group.
Yes.
The last thing that I think like I want to talk about for this, I don't know if you have more. What about like taking D&D or like just like tabletop RPG elements and putting that into wargaming?
Like Warhammer?
Yeah.
It's difficult to do I know they've tried with like Crusade.
Yeah.
To bring that in. I haven't played that yet. I mean, I haven't played that much of Ninth. But I've found it to be most effective at an event. Like you have to kind of have an event where everyone's like, it has to be a closed environment.
Yeah.
The games are not set up to do that. Let me back up. I think it's from an RP perspective for like war games, it's always better if that's baked into your approach to wargaming.
Yeah.
Like if you think that like, you know, you're playing in the universe, you're every time you fight a battle, you're taking a little look at that universe in your imagination, like a shared imagination, similar to an tabletop RPG. In terms of translating that to gameplay, it's hard to do without a closed group or a closed time scale to do it. Because like you can't. Like people want to play those games, they're competitive games, so pickup games are like king for 40K.
Yeah.
In historicals, you can do it a lot more because it's like less stakes. But
for me, I find it's like skirmish games are like the perfect level for that. Like doing something like a Mordheim or like our Inquisitor 28 thing that we're doing right now, or like Kill Team. Like it's way easy. Like because for me, it's like it's the scale of Warhammer where like
things die too quick.
And it's like if you have like if I'm playing my like orc army that has like 120 models in it, like it's hard to RP.
Yeah, like Lognar. Got it in the face.
Yeah. Whereas like if you're doing something that's a little bit more like skirmish, like 10 to 20 models.
Yeah, I do love that like games like Stargrave and Frostgrave and like 5 Parsecs from Home and shit are like fusing the two in a way that's like super modern and like exciting.
Yeah.
I want people, and I've been trying to do this with like homebrewing Inquisitor 28 rules, but it's difficult. People to crank that up a lot more, like modernize the RPG aspects of like a game like Mordheim with like after action role-playing encounters and stuff like that,
right,
that are like automatically procedurally generated and stuff. If people can like perfect that, I think that would be fucking amazing. I think that would be like a huge, like I think there's a cusp of like innovation on that level.
Yeah.
That's like almost there. It's like almost there. But it's the kind of thing where you, like without a DM, because that's the thing you have to do. You'd have to design a game that can work and deliver that feeling of RPG and skirmish without a DM.
Yeah.
Like you need that's where like almost actually ironically like it becomes more video gamey.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it becomes more, you have to kind of sacrifice the creative freedom of like a tabletop RPG, tabletop RPG for more of a like if this then that chart rolling. And that's the thing that's like I think there's a way to crack that in a way that'll be really satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not there yet.
No.
Yeah. But what do you think about like role playing Venn diagram with Warhammer? Like what is that?
Like for me personally, it comes into, for the most part, it just comes into like the modeling aspect of it, or like the like a little bit of list building as well. Yeah. Where it's like, oh, like, you know, like again, like self-imposed rule sets or whatever. Like I'm building this Tyranid army right now that I just like, I know it's not in the meta to be like I just want to play all like big monsters. I just want like huge bugs, you know, and I'm going to convert the fucking shit out of like a lot of them and just like make them my own, you know, like kaijus basically, right?
Yeah,
like I caught the end of Godzilla King of the Monsters on TV before AEW the other night, and I was like, that's it, that's what I want to do. But like once you get like to the table again, it's a thing where it's like Warhammer is already like it's inherently competitive. It's inherently I am playing against you, and to have that level of like, you still need to have like a conversation about like, you know, what type of game are we going for? Are we playing hyper competitive? Is this just a pickup game? Like whatever. But it's so to introduce like an RP element into like the actual like playing of the game is just like such another step above that baseline conversation that people already aren't really having.
Yeah, I think that's why Crusade, I mean, some people like Crusade, but like I've never played, but the thing that turns me off about it is that all of the RPing, role. It's difficult to even call it. It's not role playing. It's the role playing game aspects of like incremental advancement for units is all focused on making your guys better at killing or surviving.
Right.
And so just adding more rules, but it's not like it's a really dope crusade system or narrative system. I know some of the Forge World books, like for Heresy, have like done this pretty well, I think. Of like, here's a way to procedurally generate a level of stakes. Like it's got to be way more narrative. Here's how, the first mission narratively can be housed. You're gonna have to use your imagination to make it make sense for the two factions.
Yeah.
Here's a twist that can happen in the object. Like it has to be more about like objectives and decision making. Like, okay, mission 1, you drew this option, which makes the game that you're playing tilted towards like destroying a refinery or like blah blah blah, and then you got a twist in the middle that it's like, oh, now you have to make a decision that'll affect what you're gonna roll for what your next mission is. Or if you lose, then this is how it's gonna input. It has to be like that. It can't be your guy found a magic sword, because it's like that's just a die roll. Yeah, it's got to be about like because again, you got the story is going to happen after. It's going to happen when you're looking back and like, oh shit, if I had just done this instead of this, then like I could have won the battle of the sector Jurialis or some shit. It can't be like, oh, I rolled a magic sword that gives me extra damage on the chart after I won. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and it also, it's like it's hard because again, it's like we were talking earlier about like in D&D where you're only ever going to build skills within combat. You're only ever going to like, you're never like your persuade or your like sleight of hand or whatever like might come into handy like 30% of the time, but for the most part it's like just combat shit, and there isn't really a way to bake that into like a large scale like war game. Yeah, you know,
like you have to do it. That's why you have to do it in a day. And you need, like right now, I think the only way people can do it is like you need to do it in an event or like 3 games, and someone has to actually DM. Yeah, like you need that.
You need like a team of tournament organizers to like come around and like
to design missions that flow together and like blah blah blah. But there's no way that like you and I could, unless we heavily agreed to like it's more work. You have to kind of come up with everything from scratch. Yeah. But there's no one's really done a system of like, here's how. A role playing is essentially just like a series of decisions, and if you don't have decisions, you're not like role playing. Yeah. Because you're not, like, a stupid thing to say, but like if you're just doing one set course of action, then there's what role are you playing other than like you're playing Doom and you're just like, which is funny because like you do role play in Doom sometimes. It gets you in and you're just like fuck, like you're because you're like the game is just like be aggressive. Yeah. Be aggressive. And then like and so you get in that, but it's like it's one role. One role. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. That's you gotta have decisions, or else it's not a thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. There it is.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like I guess like I think in summation, I don't want to like this wasn't meant to be an hour of us being like tabletop RPGs are sick and everything else fucking sucks.
Video games rule.
Video games are cool. It's definitely just like I think that I want this to be like a celebration of like the specific things that the medium of a tabletop RPG offers that like literally no other game is able to do.
That's the key. You have to leverage the medium in any way. Don't try to like make something it's not. Because you got to do. It's like why people like when they adapt books to movies, they cut and rearrange things and give lines to other characters because it has to support the medium of film.
Totally.
And if you're telling a story or trying to tell a story in an RPG, you have to do it completely differently. It has to be you have to not know what's going to happen. Yeah. And that's where the medium can like really shine. I don't know yet how to do that in tabletop war games, but I think there's a way, but to be found later.
Hobby progress, hobby goals.
Yeah, dude, I finished the crossbowman.
You've been putting in work on these tiny motherfuckers.
Dude, they're so sick. The 10 millimeter War Master stuff. I've now have the entire core of the 1,000 points of my Dogs of War done. I'll be moving on to Sick Knights after.
Cool.
But between that, I have pledged to finish my Secret Santa because I have to do that in time for next Sunday. And I gotta fucking put work on the Repentia because I want to have the unit of Repentia ready for us because I think we're gonna play some 40k that night. So I want to have them ready to go.
Yeah, that's sick. I've put in some work on my Secret Santa. I initially was gonna just buy a dude and paint it, and then I had to fucking get in my head about it and went and bought for one mini. I bought 5 used models to kit bash together.
Yeah, dude.
Which is sick, and that's what I love about it, and I'm really stoked on it. So yeah, I've got that going, and I'm gonna finish that up. I do want to get in some more reps, some more games in 9th.
Yeah, man, we got to do that for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, the rest of the month for me is just a fucking write off because
we'll play some games on Sunday.
Yeah.
Do you got work on Monday? Not tomorrow, but the next. Yes.
That's Christmas week. So,
oh, true. That is Christmas week.
Yeah. So I have work, but I don't. I'm working night shift packing meat orders for people.
Right.
So it's I do have work on Monday, but not until 2.
Nice, because I'm gonna be off starting on Wednesday, so I'm down to
go.
Yeah, because I think everybody's gonna be off that week. I think mostly. So
must be nice.
I think what I'm saying is I think there's a lot of potential to get some games. I gotta fucking inject allergy medication into my ass though, because
cats.
Paul's got so many. I think he's got one cat, but it feels like many cats.
Anyway, this has been cocked.
You just got cocked.
You did. Okay. All right. We'll test that with the post group. Hit me up on Instagram at @BugsIHateBugs.
At Dorn 2 raise hell, the number 2. At Dorn 2 raise hell.
And I do a wrestling podcast as well. If you just can't get enough of these dulcet tones, you want to hear about dudes slamming dudes, it's Stone Cold Shots podcast.
There you go. Easy. Thanks. Bye.